Have you ever wanted a podcast that did it all? Sports, politics, world events. Well, you have come to the right place, because you are listening to C&C Talks.
Hello, I'm Colin,
I'm Charlie.
and welcome to episode 2 of the second season of the C&C Talks podcast.
Just a reminder, as we do every week, we release every Tuesday, and we talk about politics, world events, and sports. It is currently Monday, January 9th, 2023, at about 6 p.m. Pacific time.
And we're not really going to talk about the College Football Playoff National Championship today, because it's not over at the time that we're recording. It will be over before this episode is out. We can say, though, that Georgia's just absolutely beating up on TCU at the moment.
Current score is 31-7 in favor of Georgia.
Yeah, and we'll discuss that game a lot more on next week's episode, which will be out on Wednesday because of the holiday on Monday. Coming up on this episode, we're going to talk about the Speaker of the House election. So in January 6th type insurrection attempt in Brazil, the final regular season week of the NFL season, and a whole lot more. Charlie, let's dive right into it.
Yeah, so we're going to start this episode with Kevin McCarthy, finally, after 15 ballots of voting in the House of Representatives, has finally won speakership. This is historic, of course. This hasn't happened in a very long time that we have had to go to several ballots. There was a small group of 20 far-right Republicans who were stopping this maneuver. That number grew to 21 before McCarthy eventually gave so much in concessions that he finally pulled those 20 to vote for him in the 15th ballot.
Yeah, and some of those concessions are just, absolutely terrible. They completely gutted the Office of Congressional Ethics. The House Freedom Caucus, which is this far-right caucus, they're now going to have several seats on the House Rules Committee, which means that they'll basically be able to decide what comes to the floor of the House. Lots of other prime committee assignments for Freedom Caucus members as well, guaranteed votes on certain Republican priorities, just a whole list of things. And what this shows is that Kevin McCarthy, Charlie, really wants to be speaker, but he only wants the fame from the speakership. He wants to be seen with the picture of him holding the gavel while everyone else is applauding. He doesn't actually really care that much of the actual power. He basically gave up all of his power to the far-right group. And you know why those far-right members, Charlie, felt so empowered to do what they did?
Why is that?
Because Kevin McCarthy, for the longest time, has empowered them. If, say, after January 6th, he had just gone in after them, maybe tried to take steps to expel them from Congress, as some Democrats were pushing for, like actually crack down hard on members of his caucus that were like trying to overthrow the United States' democracy, then maybe he wouldn't have been in this spot. He would have actually been able to get stuff done as speaker. Instead, he's just going to get to hold a gavel and bang it a few times, and then the far-right members are going to hold all of the power. And just a disaster for McCarthy, and humiliating too, right? It took 15 ballots. The last time it took 2 ballots, 1923. I believe that McCarthy's speaker election, I think that this took the 5th or 4th most ballots of all time. And just humiliating. And then going into the 14th ballot, he said he had the votes because he could count, though he didn't. And it wasn't that someone voted a way that he didn't think so. It's that he literally could not count. Everybody voted on the 14th ballot exactly as he expected them to. He thought it would be enough. It wasn't. So, Kevin McCarthy has no control over the House GOP caucus. He is not a very effective leader at all. And honestly, with the things that the House Republicans have done to make it easier to remove the Speaker, it would not at all be surprising to me if he was not Speaker of the House in as short of a time as a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that remains to be seen. It is interesting to see really how much he did give up to become Speaker, and we'll see how that develops in the coming weeks and months.
Yes, we will. Moving on to some bad news for Democrats. Senator Debbie Stabenow will not seek re-election for the Senate in 2024. She's a Democratic senator from Michigan. And Charlie, this really complicates the Senate map for Democrats.
Yes, it makes an already quite difficult map for the Democrats even harder. She is a very popular Senate candidate. The Democrats already, as I said, have a very difficult map coming up in 2024. They need to defend Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Ohio, West Virginia, and Montana. And there's also no good opportunities for them to get pickups. The best ones there are in Florida and Texas, which
that's not happening.
Which both seem rather unlikely, given the current political situation. The Democrats currently hold 51 and can only afford to lose then one seat.
Yeah,
which
and Charlie,
is really not ideal.
Yeah, Charlie, keep in mind that one seat could be the vice presidency, right? If they lose Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote because they lose the presidency, for example, in 2024, then they would have to hold all 8 of those states or else find a place to pick up a seat in order for them to maintain control of the Senate.
Which, of course, would be very difficult.
Yeah. So who are some candidates that may run in Michigan for the Democrats?
Well, for the Democrats, Congresswoman Ilsa Slotkin is expected to run for that seat.
Okay, yeah, I know. I mean, Michigan is not short of Democratic talent, people like Governor Gretchen Whitmer, State Senator Mallory McMorrow, but it sounds like neither of them are interested in running for that seat. Also, Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, who ran for president in 2020 and is currently the Secretary of Transportation. He moved his residence to Michigan a couple months ago. He's expressed no interest in running. So as of now, Alyssa Slotkin seems to be the top candidate for Democrats.
Let's move on to world events now. And there was an attempt at an insurrection in Brazil, very similar to what we had in Washington D.C. with January 6th, with far right protesters storming Brazil's Capitol building and their Supreme Court as well. This was a response to Jair Bolsonaro losing the election for president back in October.
Yeah, and the world's laughing at America, and this is, make no mistake, there can be a direct line drawn between what happened on January 6th and what happened in Brazil on January 8th, just 2 years and 2 days later. Right? Basically the exact same situation. Far-right president lost. They didn't like the results of the outcome. They didn't like the results of the election. So they got their people to storm the Congress while they were far away. In Bolsonaro's case, he's in Florida with Trump actually at the moment, and right, the world is laughing at America over this. Like, what happens in America matters, and what's happening in America is fascism. It's coming to life. As we've mentioned, there's an entire caucus in the House of Representatives that's fascist, and they just got a whole lot more power because Kevin McCarthy wanted to bang a gavel a couple of times.
Yeah, it is actually rather interesting to see because, of course, throughout these last few years, we have seen a rise in these far-right movements. Of course, with January 6th, we had that attempt at a coup in Germany. We had this insurrection in Brazil. It'll be interesting to see going into the rest of 2023 and, of course, then into 2024, which is a huge year for the U.S. because we have a presidential election that year. It'll be interesting to see if these trends do indeed continue.
Yes, and I mean, I definitely worry about these trends continuing.
As do I. Just a reminder, you're listening to the C&C Talks podcast. Thank you for listening. Let's move on to sports.
Yeah, It was the final week of the NFL season, week 18. But before we actually talk about the games, let's talk about Damar Hamlin, who, of course, has been in all of our thoughts for the last week since he collapsed on the field after hitting T. Higgins and underwent cardiac arrest, had to be resuscitated twice. It's actually surprisingly very, very good news with Damar Hamlin. He was able to move and talk. He's actually now been released from the hospital and has been flown back to Buffalo. So, I mean, I don't think that you should expect him to be playing football anytime soon, but still some very, very good news just in terms of his life.
Yes, it's rather crazy to see his I don't want to say his comeback, but how well he's done considering what happened to him on Monday. It's really nice to see him begin his recovery process, and I think it's really good for the team as well.
Agreed.
But
I mean, also just a shout out to all those medical staff. They just did a tremendous job, clearly.
Yes, they did. And then about the Bills-Bengals game that was canceled, do you think the NFL handled it right, or do you think they should have done something different?
I mean, if this game was played in like week 5, then I'd try to reschedule it for later in the season. But just like, it was not right to restart that game or continue that game within like a week or so. And really, that's all that they had before the playoffs. So I think that they did do the right thing, as difficult as that makes scheduling, especially given that the Bills and Bengals are both contenders, but just logistically fairly impossible. So I'm surprised I'm saying it, but the NFL did something good for once.
Yeah, and then we had 2 big Saturday games. The Chiefs had a chance to clinch the number 1 seed against the Raiders, and they did do that. The Raiders have just not had a good year. They signed Devontae Adams in the offseason. Everyone thought that was a big, though it was indeed a big splashy move to try to really regain some of the power that team used to have. But it just really didn't work. And now they're short on quarterbacks. They're going to need to look to the draft. So how can they improve?
Well, I mean, I'm honestly kind of surprised that they moved away from Derek Carr, but I don't think that Jared Stidham is a long-term option either. So I agree they need a quarterback, but really, we talked about this last week somewhat. They need to improve their defense.
Yeah, they have one of the league's worst defenses.
It just completely sucks, and honestly, I'm not sure why people, including me, just completely overlooked that aspect of their team when talking about them in the preseason. But their defense is bad. That's their best path towards getting better. Their other Saturday game was another big one. The Jaguars beat the Titans. They've clinched the AFC South. Charlie, that also means that you won your bet. Congratulations.
I did indeed. I am very lucky.
Yeah, we kind of went back and forth throughout the season as to whether you actually were going to win that. We changed our minds a lot, but what led to this turnaround for the Jaguars?
Well, I really think they started playing a lot better. Lawrence really started kicking it in a high gear. He didn't have a great game against Tennessee, but he had a couple of good games previously. Their defense really stepped up as well. They had a couple of huge interceptions. They had a pick 6 to end the game against the Cowboys, and then they had a huge fumble against Josh Dobbs last weekend that ended up winning them the game.
Yeah, I mean, also to me, the big turnaround was they no longer have Urban Meyer as their coach, and that's every single day starting to look more and more like the worst coaching hire of all time. I mean, the Jaguars just keep winning without him. I mean, it's not just all of the off-field stuff. It's that the Jaguars just sucked when Urban Meyer was their coach.
Well, they weren't very good before he was there either.
I mean, fair, but they did just draft Trevor Lawrence. Since then, Trevor Lawrence has been a great quarterback.
Urban Meyer has not been a good coach.
I mean, Urban Meyer has also just not been a coach since then.
Yep. Luckily for everyone else.
Agreed. So what happened to the Titans, though? Is it just injury with losing Ryan Tannehill, or is this something bigger that they may not be able to bounce back from?
it was injuries. Henry kind of got shut down in a couple of those games. Their defense really stopped functioning very well. Going from 7-3 to ending your season 7-9, I believe. 7-10 was it? They
Yeah,
just
7 and
really
10.
collapsed. It did not. They just didn't look like a good team. They had a couple of really bad losses. The loss to the Texans was just terrible. But I do really think the main problem here was injuries, and I do think they will be better next season.
Yeah.
Getting rid of A.J. Brown didn't help them.
No, it did not. Falcons beat the Buccaneers. It's a question which is, should the Falcons stick with Desmond Ridder next year, or should they look elsewhere?
I think it is too early to judge Desmond Ridder. He seemed at times pretty good, at times pretty bad. I think we need to give him another season before we can officially say that the Falcons need to move on from him. And I do think they have more bigger long-term problems that they have to deal with before they worry about their quarterback.
So does that mean that as we look at the draft, that they should be looking not at quarterback, but at other positions to fill in the holes around him? Should they really try to build around him, or should they just move on?
I mean, that is an interesting question because it's not a good idea to build around someone who isn't good. But
Exactly.
I do think they need to. I do think they need to give him more of a chance. And if he doesn't pan out, I think they should keep Mariota there as well.
But so you really think that Marcus Mariota is even a better option at all than Ridder, yet alone sufficient enough to potentially get them to where they want to be?
Yeah, well, I think next season there's basically no expectations for the Falcons. I think they're just going to give Ridder as many chances as they can get. If he doesn't pan out, they'll see what they can do otherwise, and if not, they can get a QB in the 2024 draft.
Yeah. All right. Bills beat the Patriots. Bills actually they returned 2 kickoffs for touchdowns, including the opening kickoff. Patriots now though they're eliminated from the playoffs. Bill Belichick says he will be back to coach them next season. But what's next for the Patriots?
They at some points in the season looked quite good. They looked really good at times, and at others they just really floundered. They really fell apart in the last few weeks of the season. I don't think there's really any cause for concern. They need to really build. They need to get a better receiver core, but other than that, Mac Jones is banned out pretty well, and their defense is still looking pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. The Vikings beat the Bears. Bears clinched the #1 draft pick with this loss. So should the Bears draft Bryce Young, or should they continue with Justin Fields and draft somebody else, or maybe even trade away that pick?
There is but 2 players. There's but 1 player on the Chicago Bears team that is actually functional, and that is Justin Fields. He is the only good player on their team. So no, they should keep Justin Fields.
So then what should they be looking for in the draft then? Like anybody else?
I think, yeah, but really anything else. I think they could get some pretty good value picks or players if they using that pick because they're really in a rebuild mode. They need to rebuild their defense, rebuild their offense as well, and really build around Fields, who's become a pretty good quarterback.
Yep. The Bengals, they beat the Ravens. Ravens still heading to the playoffs, but they've collapsed. Is there something more than just Lamar Jackson being injured that's hurting the Ravens?
I don't think so. I do think they, as I just said with previously with the Bears, they do need to work on, with the Patriots, they do need to work on their wide receiver core to complement Mark Andrews. But really, I think Lamar being injured was the only reason they didn't do as well as they were expected to.
Yeah, it does bring up an interesting point, though, which is that Lamar Jackson has missed significant time in the last 2 seasons that has really hurt the Ravens. And when he plays, he looks like his old MVP self. So the Ravens have a decision to make this offseason, which is, should they move on from him?
I don't know. It is possible that they can get a good draft pick for him, but I do think they should just keep going with him. I don't know if he still has his option left or if that expired or what's going on there, but I do think they need to pick up an extension at least for, at minimum, another 2-year extension.
All right. Now the Texans in maybe the They beat the Colts in maybe the only game of the year that they didn't actually want to win. They may have lost their chance to draft Bryce Young. But they also, after the game, they fired their head coach Lovie Smith. Charlie, was this the right decision?
That's a tough one, because they did fire him. Well, they had a terrible season. But admittedly, who on that team has any quality whatsoever and has any star power? No one. Maybe Dameon Pierce a few years from now, but that's it. They have no one. They absolutely need to rebuild, and I think they're going to start doing that. But I don't think this was a good idea. What do you think?
Yeah, no, Charlie, I think that it was completely the wrong decision to fire Smith. I mean, and on top of that, this is kind of their thing. They hire a black head coach, and they give him nothing around him, and then they fire him at the end of the season when naturally the team's terrible. Their general manager is still there. Why? They're terrible. Why? Not because of their coach, but because they have no pieces.
Yeah, you can't blame not having pieces on the coach.
Exactly.
Because it's not his job.
Yeah, so the Texans, as we mentioned a minute ago, they may have lost their chance to draft Bryce Young, although, as we said earlier, also the Bears probably unlikely to draft Young. So what should the Texans do now?
See if they can draft a quarterback, because I don't see them sticking with Davis Mills.
No, it does not seem to be a good option. But I feel like a team that has even less certainty than the Texans might be the Colts. What do?
They need to fire Jeff. They need to find a replacement for Jeff Saturday.
Agreed.
Find a quarterback. Find a new running back, because Dameon Pierce stopped work. Because Jonathan Taylor stopped working apparently. Find a new defense, and maybe just find a better team. They need to do an absolute 100% overhaul of their entire team.
Yeah, I mean, this does not look like a team that will come close anytime soon to contention, which is honestly kind of shocking given that it wasn't that long ago, just a year ago, when they almost made the playoffs. In fact, they missed the playoffs because they lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Jacksonville.
Dolphins beat the Jets. Dolphins clinch a playoff spot, but what should the Jets do about quarterback going forward? Because Zach Wilson's not the answer. Joe Flacco's sure as heck not the answer.
Mike White might be.
Mike White is probably not the answer, but you never know. And at the
certainly
end of the day, the Jets,
certainly better than the
start,
other two.
They went 7-10.
Yeah, but certainly better than the other two.
That's for sure.
Yeah, the Jets are in a bad situation. They weren't bad enough to have a shot at a good quarterback, but they weren't good enough to make the playoffs. There is a bright spot, though. Their defense was amazing. They got a couple of really good rookies to look forward to. Breece Hall, who got hurt, is going to be good next year. So, if they fix their quarterback situation, I think the Jets might be able to sneak in next year.
Yeah. No, it was definitely, I would argue, at least a step forward for the Jets, even though it wasn't much of one. 7-10 is pretty good for the New York Jets, Charlie.
Yeah, especially in the division that they play, and considering they have to play Buffalo and New England twice a year.
Exactly. I mean, well, the Panthers beat the Saints. What's the plan for either of these teams? Is there one?
I don't even know anymore for most of these teams. I'm just gonna repeat what I said before. The Saints need a QB. Their defense is okay, and Chris Olave is pretty good. That's all I have to say about them. The Panthers.
There's rumors about Brady maybe going and when Sean Payton coming back.
Yeah, that could be interesting. But I think more interestingly for the Panthers, there were some bright spots this season. If they didn't somewhat collapse towards the end of the game last week, they could be in the playoffs.
Exactly, they would be, I believe, actually.
So I don't think it's time to panic yet in Carolina, but I do think they need to fix some of their issues for next season.
Yeah, I mean the entire NFC South is bad, I think is the word that we're looking for. The Steelers beat the Browns. Is Kenny Pickett the future for Pittsburgh?
Yes, he is.
And
He
okay,
had
that
some bright
was
spots. He really did have some bright spots this year. But I think the bigger question coming out of this game, the Browns were supposed to be really good. They picked up Amari Cooper for basically nothing,
yeah.
and they got Deshaun Watson. Watson has not panned out at all. He hasn't looked very good. Cooper looked good, though. So I think if they can get Watson playing back on form, or maybe go with Jacoby Brissett, something like that, they can eventually start moving again.
Yeah, I mean,
I think,
I mean, I feel like they've played better football in the last, like since Watson came back, even though Watson maybe hasn't played great himself.
yeah, that's true. And of course, they have that monster defensive line with Myles Garrett.
Yeah, of course. He's their number one overall draft pick that actually worked out.
And in news, no one, absolutely no one saw coming. The Broncos actually won.
Oh, I saw it coming actually.
Not a typo. And the Chargers started their starting players this week.
Did they play the whole game though?
I don't know actually, but it is they did start the game. So I think a question coming out of this game is: has Russell Wilson been better in the last few weeks, and can he carry it into next season?
I mean, I think that he pretty clearly has been better in the last few weeks. So the question is, though, like you said, were the last few weeks a fluke, or with the first dozen weeks him just figuring it out and now he's back on track? I mean, I think it'll
Well,
help him if he gets a competent coach. We've heard Sean Payton's name tossed around. We've heard Jim Harbaugh's name tossed around for
but of
that
course,
Broncos head coach opening.
but Harbaugh is in some trouble right now because there's a scandal at Michigan.
Yeah, but those are some names being tossed around. I think that will help Russell Wilson ultimately, though. Every year that he gets older, I think he's gonna continue to get worse. And I see the Broncos being basically about as good of a team this year, or about as good of a team next year as they are this year.
Yeah, that's looking like what it's gonna be. The Seahawks beat the Rams, and they clinched the playoffs because of something that we'll talk about in a minute. Do you think Sean McVay is going to stay with the Rams?
I do. I think that there's like the last couple off seasons, there's actually been a lot of rumors circulating around McVay. I think that yeah, the Rams had problems. Some of that can be attributed to injuries. A lot of it can't. I still think that McVay is going to stay, but I think that it's pretty clear that he does not like he's still young. He's not the guy that's looking to be an NFL head coach till he's Pete Carroll's age, for example. I think that there's a really good chance that he ends up becoming a TV analyst somewhere, and it seems that he would be very, very good at that.
And who's going to be their quarterback
for the Rams next year?
Yeah,
I've got it as Stafford, but we will see.
I'm saying that it's going to be. Honestly, I don't think anyone saw this coming. I'm going to say Baker Mayfield.
I think that Baker Mayfield, what he did with the Rams, I won't go as far as to say he deserves to have a starting job somewhere next year. But also, it's like if Davis Mills gets a starting job, then Baker Mayfield should be getting a starting job.
Or he could go to the Texans and stop Davis Mills from getting a starting job.
Yeah. No, the Eagles, they beat the Giants and have clinched the NFC East and the number 1 seed. Are they back on track?
I definitely think so. I think Jalen Hurts coming back, I think, as I said last week, would really give them a boost. They beat the Giants. That was actually a pretty close game, and I do think they might have some trouble in the playoffs.
Yeah, but I think that bye week for them is really going to serve them well.
Yeah, I agree. The 49ers beat the Cardinals in a blowout. The Cardinals then fired their coach, Cliff Kingsbury, finally. Do you think this was the right decision? And can the Cardinals bounce back next season?
First question, yes. Second question, no. Cliff Kingsbury's a problem. he's not the only problem. Kyler Murray's somewhat of a problem. I think that he's just not the right fit. But Cliff Kingsbury definitely needed to go.
Yep. The Cowboys had a really bad loss to the Commanders. How concerning is this, do you think, for the Cowboys going into the playoffs?
Really concerning. They're going to play the Buccaneers. We'll get to the playoff games in a minute, but they're going to lose to the Buccaneers. Because it's the Cowboys in the playoffs, and that's just kind of what happens. And I will not be taking any further questions about that at this time.
And on Sunday night, the game of the year, the final game of the season, the Lions beat the Packers, knocking the Packers out of the playoffs and sending Seattle to play San Francisco.
Just talk about this, Charlie. I know you want to. I'll speak for as long as you want on this.
What did I tell you guys? I told you they weren't going to do it. I told you that they were going to get run off their own field by the Detroit Lions. Hey, I was right. Packers fans, it's done. Rodgers might be done. Honestly, I think for your team, it would probably be better if he was done. Start Jordan Love next season. See if he can get back on track. See you next year, Packers.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you brought up about Aaron Rodgers. Do you think that he has played his last game? I don't see him going anywhere else. He's said as much Sunday night, but do you think that he will be back next year?
He might be. And I think the bigger question, though, is do the Packers want him back?
I mean, I don't know, but I also get the feeling that if Aaron Rodgers says, I'm coming back, then the Packers will just be like, okay, sure.
But, I mean, the reason that they didn't make the playoffs was because of him.
Well, and also because of, what's his name?
Quay Walker.
Quay Walker, there you go.
Well, yes, but stuff like that happens all the time. There's injuries. Players are out for a play. You can't just
Players decide to get ejected by punching the trainer.
But you can't just chuck something up on 3rd and 10 that is nowhere near your receiver whatsoever and have it get intercepted and that be your last pass of the game and maybe of your career.
If that's the last pass of his career, man.
So let's now get to the NFL draft order. As we said earlier, the Bears will get the number 1 pick, followed by the Texans. Then the Cardinals and Colts at 3 and 4, followed by the Seahawks. That pick is from the Denver Broncos. Then the Lions, who get their pick from the Rams. And then the Raiders and Falcons, Panthers, Eagles. The Eagles have their pick from someone.
Yeah, I'm not sure who, but yeah.
I believe it's New Orleans.
It may be.
They have their pick from. Then the Titans, the Texans again, who I believe that one's from the Browns.
The Texans pick? Yes, I think so. And yes, the Eagles pick is from the Saints.
Then the Jets, Patriots, Packers, Commanders, Steelers, and Lions. Those are picks 1 through 18. The other picks will be determined by the playoffs.
Yeah.
And here's your playoff preview. In the NFC, we have the Seahawks and 49ers, Giants and Vikings, Cowboys and Buccaneers, with the Eagles having the bye week. And in the AFC, Dolphins, Bills, Ravens, Bengals, Chargers, Jaguars, with the Chiefs getting that bye week.
Yeah, let's get into a couple of those games. Start with in the NFC. Just quickly, your thoughts on those 3 matchups.
As much as I want to say it, the Niners are going to win that game.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
The Vikings are going to get knocked out by the Giants, and the Bucks are going to beat the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that who was it? I think it was Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk said it perfectly. The Vikings are either going to win by 2-4 or lose by 20-40.
Yeah, that's basically been the Vikings this season.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pick the Giants to win that game. I think. Yeah, the Seahawks fans can fool themselves all they want, but the reality is that the 49ers are a very good team, and the Seahawks are kind of meh.
Our only goal this season was to win more than 1 game, and we did it.
I would say also finish better than the Broncos.
And we did by a lot. Now how about the AFC? I got the Bills beating the Dolphins, the Bengals beating the Ravens, and the Jaguars beating the Chargers.
Yeah, something like that. But I also want to talk for a second about this Chargers-Jaguars game, because to me this is fascinating, because these are 2 teams that kind of have recently had, I guess, kind of a history of underperforming, and now they seem to be primed to be good for a long time, especially given with the Jaguars the rest of that division.
Yeah, well, especially for the Jaguars, considering that in that division you have the Colts, which, as we said earlier, are in deep trouble for the next 5 years minimum. You have the Texans, who are imploding still, and you have the Titans, who can never seem to pull something together.
Yeah. So, sorry, what did you say your picks were in the AFC?
I have Bills, Bengals, Jaguars.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Bills, Bengals, Chargers. I do think that the Chargers are a better team, and the Chargers also. We were talking just a few weeks ago about whether they'd make the playoffs at all.
I mean, but that's true of Jacksonville too. They were 3-7 at one point.
Yeah, that is true. So, at this point, who do you have coming out of each conference now that we see the final bracket?
I'm gonna go. This is gonna sound insane, and anyone who listens to this is gonna say, "Well, that's not very smart of you." I'm going Bills Giants.
Huh.
I don't know why, but I feel like Daniel Jones is just gonna pull an Eli Manning and go nuts in the playoffs.
Huh. Okay. I'm gonna go in the NFC. In the NFC Championship, I have the 49ers beating the Eagles. The AFC Championship, I have a rematch of last year, Bengals Chiefs.
Oh, really?
And Charlie, I think that when we say Bengals Chiefs, we already know who's coming out on top.
The Bengals.
Yep. And I have the 49ers winning the Super Bowl. Bengals losing 2 straight Super Bowls.
By the way, if you were wondering who I had for my if you're wondering who I had for my other the teams that lose in the championship game, I have the Niners and the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I just think
fair.
I think Buffalo's going to win the whole thing.
Yeah.
I just think Josh Allen's really good. Their defense is going to step up, and I think they're going to have they have the entire NFL community behind them right now.
Yeah. The thing though, between I would say the Eagles, the Vikings, the 49ers, the Bills, the Chiefs, and the Bengals, there's not really a wrong answer. I mean, maybe Kirk Cousins in the playoffs.
I mean, I said the Giants, so...
You did say the Giants, and that's a wrong answer. Sorry.
True, but hey, the Jaguars were also should have been a wrong answer, but...
Correct.
That worked, somehow.
Hey, anyone has a shot. Well, of those 14 teams.
Well, no, unless you're the Cowboys.
Well, yeah, okay. And finally, Trevor Bauer finally been released by the Dodgers. He's now a free agent. This is after his suspension for domestic violence ended. That is going to do it for this episode of C&C Talks. Make sure that you subscribe. We have episodes coming out every single Tuesday wherever you listen to your podcasts, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. You can also visit our website, cctalks.net, which has everything that you need to know about the show, as well as all of our bonus content on it. Call us with your questions, 360-389-2630. Again, that's 360-389-2630. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, @CC Talks Podcast. For our producer Morris, our production designer Zack, and our proof editor Drake, I'm Colin.
Charlie.
Who just hit himself in the head. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.